Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos Daf Kuf Mem Hey is divided in half by a Mishnah. The first half of the Daf discusses the halachas of squeezing, specifically the issue of squeezing liquids directly into foods. Is that permitted or not? We're going to see two statements and possible adjustments to the statements on that. Then the Gemara is going to get into a totally side issue of aid mipi aid, where you have a witness say that I heard another witness say something, and then we'll come back to our Mishnah for one last thought about chopping up honeycombs and letting the honey drip out before we get to the next Mishnah. The Mishnah takes us to the subject of cooking foods that are cooked already. Bishul achar bishul. We're not going to spend too much time on the subject before getting into a wide-ranging agarata on comparing Eretz Yisrael and the Jewish community in Bavel, which is what most of that daf will be about. So first of all, let's go to the daf here, and we had just seen a statement of Shmuel, which will be echoed by Rav later on in the daf. Shmuel had said the following halacha. Shmuel said that we know that it's an Isser D'Oraisa to squeeze juice out of fruits or to milk a cow or any other animal. It's taking liquid out of the place in which they grew. That's an Isser D'Oraisa of Soichet, which is a tolda of Dash, which is extracting. Now Shmuel says that the only Isser is where you're taking the juice out of a food and now you're making it into a liquid. So you're extracting liquid from food. But if it's the liquid that you're taking out will have the halachic status of being a food as well, then it's not a problem, because you're taking food out of food. That's not the malacha of schita. Now Shmuel's example was that if you squeeze, let's say, fruits, or you milk goat directly into a pot of food, so going directly into the pot, it has the status of the pot itself and what's in the pot itself. So it has the status of food. It's being lost amongst the food. It has the status of food. Therefore, it is going from the food that it's in, the fruit, to the food that is being squeezed into the pot, and it's not a problem. So the Gemara has challenged Shmuel's claim that the liquids that go directly into food are considered to be food themselves. We already saw one challenge, but now we're going to see another challenge. Then the Gemara is going to try to show that actually what Shmuel said is a machlokes tanoim. That machlokes tanoim will have three potential explanations as to what they're arguing about. Proof to one of them, we'll get to that. Then Rav is going to echo Shmuel's halacha, and the Gemara is he's going to add something, and he's going to add that it applies not only to fruits, but to objects which have liquid soaked into them, and the Gemara will discuss that. So first let's deal with this. We're up to our second proof against Shmuel's concept that if you squeeze liquids directly into food, that has the halachic status of food. And the Gemara has the following case. Here we're discussing squeezing oil out of olives, and it does not differentiate between whether you're squeezing it directly into food or not directly into food. Therefore, we're assuming that it applies even if you're squeezing directly into food. And it says the following thing. It says if you have an olive, which is exactly, or you have olives, which are exactly the size of an exact egg. So you squeeze this olive and some of the juice comes out. Now the halacha is as follows. In order for something to become tamei, to be mekabel tumo, if it's food, it has to be minimally the size of an egg. It can't be smaller. If it's liquid, it can be any size. Now this olive was exactly the size of an egg. So the second you squeeze some of the juice out of it, it is no longer the size of an egg. It's missing some of the juice. It's become too small. So the Gemara says that if it's a zav who's squeezing it, it stays tahar, because the instant you're squeezing it, we're not worried about. The Rishonim ask why not, but right after that, it becomes already less than the minimum size, and you didn't touch the juice itself. So the Gemara says, so the implication is that if a zav were to touch the juice when it's squeezing out, or the implication were to be, and this is specifically what the Gemara says, if it would be larger than an egg, which means that you don't have to worry about the fact that it gets to be smaller than an egg when you start squeezing, the zav would be metamid. Now here's the problem. If it's being squeezed directly into food, then it has the halacha of food according to Shmuel, then it never got wet. It was never touched by one of the seven liquids, which you need to have happen in order for it to become tummy first. So how could the zav make it tummy? It was never machshir l'tumah, never touched anything wet. So the Gemara answers, okay, not a problem. This case is talking where you squeezed it into a bowl. Squeezed into a bowl, even if it's being squeezed directly into food, we said earlier that that's also because it looks like it's being squeezed into a cup. It looks like it's just a drink, and that's why it's also midrabanan. Okay, so this is not about this. really, you're right, just this case is not the case where it's being squeezed into a pot like Shmuel said before. Okay, now the Gemara wants to say that Shmuel's halacha is actually a machlokes tanaim. What's the case? The case is that somebody who is a baker, he made bread, and he wanted to put a gloss on the bread. He didn't use egg, he used olive juice. He rubbed olive juice on the dough to give it a nice shine. So the machlokes, if that makes the dough now huchshar to be mekabel tuma or not, does that olive juice count as liquid to make the dough now ready to be mekabel tuma? The machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama. So the Gemara wants to say, so Mustama, this machlokes is about exactly our thing, because that olive shine is directly onto the food, and therefore that's the halacha of the machlokes is, does that have the halacha of food, or does that have the halacha of a liquid? Just exactly Shmuel's idea. So the Gemara says two other explanations as what this machlokes might be. The Gemara first of all says Rav Papa says no, that's not what the machlokes is about. The machlokes is about when you have a liquid which is being destroyed and it's not going to be useful, does that count as a liquid or not? This liquid is smeared on this bread, is about to go in the oven. It's going to be burned off. So it's not going to be functional at all. Is that count as a mashka or not? And that is what this machlokes is about, not about Shmuel. As a matter of fact, Rav Papa even says, I will show you another brisa where two Tanaim are arguing about exactly that halacha. This brisa is discussing somebody who's beating up his olives. He's bruising them. Now, there could be three potential reasons why he wants to bruise them. One might be because he wants to sweeten them. One might be because he wants to make them wet to dip them in salt. And one might be because he wants to see if they're ready to be picked or not. They're still on the tree. He wants to see if the olives on the tree are ready to be picked or not. Now, does he want the juice to come out of it? If he wants to sweeten it, then he wants the juice to be there. It adds flavor. And therefore, if he didn't wash his hands beforehand and his hands are tamei, that liquid is machshir the olives, and he's metame the olives. Now, if he wanted to dip it into salt, so then he definitely did not want the olives to be there. He wanted them to stay dry, and therefore that liquid is not supposed to be there. It's not machshir, right? We know the old rule that liquids are only machshir if you're happy with where they are. You want them to be where they are. And therefore, even if his hands are tamei, he did not make the olives tamei. The question is, what happens if he wanted to see if they're going to be soft or not, or if they're ready to pick or not? That is a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, whether or not he's machshir the olives with that liquid that comes out when he beats them up, and therefore is he metame them if he didn't wash his hands. So says Rav Papa, what's this machlokes about? For sure, he wants the olives to be there. He wants the olive juice to be on them. What's the issue? So Rav Papa says the machlokes is because the juice drips down and it disappears, and the question is, does that count as a mashke or not? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Is this machlokes in this case over here as well of the olive juice on the bread? So the Gemara says, okay, you're right about the case of beating up the olives. That is what they're arguing about over there. Rav Huna ben Shua explains this. He says you're right about that. That is the machlokes over there. However, that's not the machlokes in the case of the olives. There's a third explanation as to what the machlokes is in the case of the olive juice smeared on the bread. And that is, when you have something smeared on bread, does that count as a liquid or not? Now, Shmuel's really right, that if it's mixed into food, it counts as a solid. It counts as part of the food. Here's not really mixed in. It's meant to stay in its liquid state to some extent. So it can add shine. That's the issue. Does that count as you want it to stay as liquid, or does that count as being part of the solid food, or not? Now that concludes the Gemara's discussion of Shmuel's halacha. However, the Gemara now brings the very same halacha in the name of Rav. But Rav adds a step, and that's what we're going to discuss now. The Gemara says that Rav Zeres, in the name of Chia Barashi, in the name of Rav, you're allowed to squeeze grapes directly into a pot of food, like Shmuel had said, because it's going directly into the food, and therefore it has the status of food coming out of food, not aser. But now Rav adds, you're also allowed to squeeze a fish. You're allowed to squeeze the brine, that's the fish juice, out of the fish, directly into anything. Could be into a cup. You don't have to worry about it. Why? Because fish brine has a status of food wherever it is. Even in a liquid state, it's still called food. Fish brine's a food. It's not something you drink. It's something you eat as part of a meal. Now, the Gemara says that Rav Dimi said this over, and Abaye said to him, okay, you say over this halacha in the name of Rav, that's fine. We say it over in the name of Shmuel, that's a problem, because we have a place where Shmuel has a contradictory halacha. Now the Gemara is going to quote a three-way machlokes between Rav, Shmuel, and Rav Yechanan. The Gemara first just brings Rav and Shmuel to ask the question, but it adds Rav Yechanan later, so we'll just say all three opinions. And the discussion is about squeezing vegetables. Now, there's a couple of different factors here. When you're squeezing juice out of vegetables, it could be that the vegetables were either pickled or cooked. That's why they're soaked full of juice. According to Rav, there's a difference between the two. According to Rav Yochanan Shmuel, there is no difference. The other factor is, why are you squeezing the juice? Are you squeezing because you want to eat the vegetable without any juice in it? If that's why you're squeezing it, then you don't want the juice. That's not classic squeezing. That's not usher at all. And Rav, Shmuel, and Rav Yochanan all agree that if you're squeezing the vegetables, no matter who, what, which, why they are, if you're squeezing them to get the juice out because you want a vegetable without juice in it, that's not a problem. That is mutter. The question is, if you want to squeeze it because you want the juice. You want the juice, the brine, the sauce, whatever is inside the vegetables. What's the halach over there? So the three machlokes are as follows. If Yochanan says it's an Isser D'Oraisa, you're not allowed to do it. Shmuel says it's an Isser D'Rabbanon. It's not an Isser D'Oraisa because the juice wasn't born there, but it is an Isser D'Rabbanon because you may come to confuse it and end up squeezing grapes. Rav says it depends. If it's pickled vegetables, it's an Isser D'Rabbanon. If it's cooked vegetables, then it's mutter. And the reason that it's mutter is because cooked vegetables, the juice inside is considered food. The juice inside cooked vegetables is food. Now the Gemara's kasha is now on Shmuel, right? This is what Abaye said. Shmuel said that it's an Isser D'Rabbanan even if it's cooked. But fish brine, according to our version of it, he said is permitted to squeeze out because it's considered to be food. Both of these are considered to be, the juice that comes out is considered food. And yet, according to our version, Shmuel said that if it's out of vegetables, it's permitted. Out of cooked vegetables, it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. And out of fish, it's mutter. So this is what Abaye asked Rav Dimi. The Gemara says, Rav Dimi said, listen, he quoted a pasuk and he said, Halakim. He said, by God, I saw it in my own eyes. Okay, meaning I have direct evidence that Rav said this and not Shmuel, and therefore you have a problem on Shmuel, but Shmuel never said it. Okay, because I learned it from Rav Yirmiyah directly, and Rav Yirmiyah heard it directly from Rav Zera, who heard it directly from Yechiya Barashi, who heard it directly from Rav, and therefore it's definitely coming from Rav. Okay, now going back to the machlokes between Rav, Shmuel, and Rav Yochanan, the Gemara is going to quote a brisa, which is going to be a problem on all of them. The brisa says the following halacha. The brisa says that you are allowed to squeeze liquid out of pickled vegetables as long as you're planning to use it on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do it if you're not planning to use it until after Shabbos because that's preparing for afterwards. That's hachana l'chol. Olives or grapes, you're not allowed to squeeze under any circumstances. That's an Isser D'Oraisa. So the Gemara says none of this fits with none of them because it doesn't differentiate between squeezing the liquid out of the pickled vegetables because you want to have the vegetable free of liquid or because you want to have the liquid itself. As a matter of fact, you can't just tell me that we're referring to where you want to have the vegetable because right afterwards it talks about where you're squeezing grapes and olives, and there you don't want the crushed grape and olive, you want the liquid that's out of it. So in the case where you want to get the liquid out of it, Rav, Shmuel, and Rav Yochanan all said that it's forbidden. Rav said it's a Isser D'Rabbanan if it's pickled, not if it's cooked. Shmuel said it's an Isser D'Rabbanan no matter what, and Rav Yochanan said it's an Isser D'Oraisa no matter what. So how are they going to understand this? So each one's going to have to explain it so that it fits with his halachos. They're all going to follow the following thing. They're all going to say, no, the brisa when it said you're allowed to squeeze it was referring to where you just wanted to get rid of the liquid, you wanted to have the vegetable itself dried out. And we're going to have to add in a couple of words so that the rest of the Mishnah makes sense. It's a different halacha talking about a different case. So Rav is going to adjust the brisa as follows. Rav says, the brisa says that you're allowed to squeeze it if you're planning to use it on Shabbos. That's referring to where you want to get rid of the juice. If you want to squeeze it so that you could keep the juice, so then it's permitted if it's cooked. It's forbidden if it's pickled. And grapes and olives is an Isser D'Oraisa. Now Shmuel doesn't have to do that adjustment. Shmuel says this, you're allowed to squeeze it if you plan to use it on Shabbos, is referring to where you want to get rid of the juice. If you want to keep the juice, then it's an Isser D'Rabbanan, and grapes and olives is an Isser D'Oraisa. And Rav Yochanan has to adjust it as follows. He has to say this, that is permitted if you want to use it on Shabbos is if you want to get rid of the juice, but if you want to keep the juice, then it's like squeezing grapes and olives, which is an Isser D'Oraisa. Okay, moving on. The Gemara says a statement of Reb Rashi, name of Rav. It's only Isser D'Oraisa to squeeze grapes and olives. Any other types of fruit is not Isser D'Oraisa to squeeze because they're not commonly squeezed, possibly Isser D'Rabbanan. Now the Gemara quotes a brisa that says something similar, and that launches us into a different subject. The brisa says they learned in the yeshiva of Menashe it's only Isser D'Oraisa to squeeze grapes and olives, and you're allowed to have a witness say over testimony that he heard from another witness only in a case of Eidus Isha. That is, if a woman lost her husband in overseas, foreign land, we don't know if he died or not, but a witness says, I heard from another witness that he died. We have a special leniency to allow such testimony because we don't want the woman to be stuck not able to get married for the rest of her life. Now, on this subject, the Gemara asks, What about saying edus on a bechar? The halacha is that when a kohen receives a bechar, firstborn kosher animal, he's supposed to bring it as a carbon in the Beis Hamikdash unless it gets a mum. If he gets a mum, then he gets to use it for his own purposes. Now, what if he comes and he says, "Oh, here, look, it has a mum." So some kohanim would put that mum in there on purpose, and that is disreputable. So Chazal made a rule that you have to have a witness that saw the mum arrive. That's a difficult thing to get. So Chazal accepted unclassic witnesses. So the Gemara wants to know, can you accept for that a witness who heard from another witness? So Gemara says that Rav Asi and Rav Ami said it is permitted. Rav Ami said to Rav Asi, Rav Ami said it is forbidden, and Rav Asi said it is permitted. Rav Ami said to Rav Asi, but how could you tell me that it's permitted? But we just learned in the yeshiva of Menashe, it's called Menashe here, that a witness saying over hearsay is only permitted for Edus Isha. So Rav Asi adjusts, he says not Edus Isha, not Edus to free and Aguna, it's talking about Edus which a woman could say. And that refers to both Edus, testimony to free a woman who is an Aguna to say that her husband has actually died, and it also counts for Bechor, where a woman is kosher for that Edus as well. Now the Gemara quotes that Rav Yemar allowed hearsay testimony to permit a Bechor, and Mareimar was not happy about it, and he called him Yemar Shari Bukhra, Yemar who allows the firstborns animals. Now the Gemara says the halacha is that Eid Mipi hearsay testimony is kosher for a Bechor. Okay, going back to the Mishnah, we've seen that if you chop up a beehive and you let the honey drip out on Shabbos, as a machlokes between Rav Elazar and the Tanakama says it's asur, and Rav Elazar said it's permitted. Now the Gemara says that when Rav Hoshia came from Narada, he brought with him a brisa, says this exact case, except instead of talking about honeycombs, it's talking about grapes. Chop up grapes and let the juice drip out, and it also adds an opinion to Rav Elazar. Not only Rav Elazar says it's permitted, but it's Rav Shimon. So Abaye says, shkoich, what are you adding over here? Grapes, honey is the same. The only thing you did was you added another name. Rav Shimon also holds like Rav Elazar. Great, why do I need that? When it says, Rav Yosef says, no. Rav Yosef is the one who said you just added a name, and Abaye said to Rav Yosef, no, it's a very big thing that it teaches us here. I would have thought that grapes are different because the juice that comes out of grapes is liquid. It's a mashke. On the other hand, honey that comes out of chopped up honeycombs is food. Honey is considered food. And therefore, I would have thought that this entire machlokes only applies to honey. Rav Elazar and Shimon only allow it when it's honey, when it's food from food. And therefore, you have an extra chiddush here that even if it's grapes, so that it's liquid out of food, it is still permitted according to Rav Elazar, and we're also adding Rav Shimon. Okay, now we get to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah talks about the halachos of cooking something which has been cooked already. The Mishnah does not discuss what happens if you want to put something back on the fire. That you can't do for sure. We're discussing putting something back into hot water, which is cooked already, back into hot water. Even possibly a klirishan, meaning the pot that was cooked in, as long as it's off the fire. So the Mishnah says the following thing. The Mishnah says anything which was cooked before Shabbos, you're allowed to put it back into hot water on Shabbos. Anything which was not cooked before Shabbos, you're not allowed to put into hot water, but you are allowed to pour hot water on it. Machlokes Rishonim, whether that's referring to water from a klirishan, which was the pot that is cooked in, or from a klisheni, which is a different container. Now, there is one thing which you're not even allowed to pour hot water on it. There are two things actually, and that is fish which has been salted for at least a year, herring, or something called kluyai, so ispinin, which is a type of fish like a sardine that comes from Spain. And the reason is because these things are completely cooked just by pouring hot water on it, and therefore you can't do it. So Gemara says, what is an example of something which you would want to cook again after you cooked it already? So Rav Safra says, Tarnagolta de Rabbi Abba. That's Rabbi Abba's chicken. Rabbi Abba had a recipe where he would cook chicken and then soak it in hot water for many days in order to make a potion which was used for cures. Rav Safra says, I once went there and I ate it, and if not, that Rabbi Abba would have quickly given me 3-year-old wine to drink. I would have thrown up from it. It tastes horrible. On the subject of Yechanan says that Rav Yochanan used to spit every time he mentioned kutach habavli, which is a food which was popular in Bavel, made from sour spoiled milk and breadcrumbs. The Gemara says that Rav Yosef was upset that people from Eretz Yisrael were making fun of the food that the Bavel people liked, and he said we would also spit every time we remembered Rabbi Abba's chicken. Not only that, but Rav Gaza once said, I once went there to Eretz Yisrael and I made kutach habavli and I gave it to people and everybody loved it and they came running after me. All the sick people wanted it so they could have some. So don't make fun of our Babylonian food. Okay, so now the Gemara says, if you did rinse the salted fish or the Spanish sardine, what is the halacha? So Rav Yosef says, it's Niser Deli Raisa, you have to bring carbon chatos. Rabbi Ravina says we actually learned that. If you look in the Mishnah carefully, it says it's Gemara Malacha, which seems to indicate that it's an actual Isdaraisa. Okay, now the Gemara brings a lengthy story here. Where it says Rav Chi bar Abba and Rav Asi were sitting in front of Rav Yechanan. They were learning from him, but Rav Yechanan fell asleep. So the two Talmidim began speaking to each other, and they asked a number of questions about Eretz Yisrael versus Bavel. So Rav Chi bar Abba asked Rav Asi, why is it that the fowl in Bavel is fatter than in Eretz Yisrael? And he said, let me go, I'll take you to the midbar of Gaza, and I'll show you plenty of fat birds. You don't have to worry about it. Then he said, why is it that the Yomim Tovim in Bavel are much more joyous than they are in Eretz Yisrael? He said, because they're poor, and they don't have enough money, so they save all their money. They can finally afford something nice for Yom Tov. How come Tamid Chachamim in Bavel wear nice clothing? Oh, well, that's because they're not Bnei Torah. They have to find a way to distinguish themselves somehow. Then he asked, why is it that the Oivdei Avodah Zarah, the Oivdei Kechavim, have a zuama, they have a contamination, spiritual contamination? He said, because they eat creepy crawlies. Okay, in the meantime, Rav Yechanan woke up and he said to them, children, I have told you in the past not to talk about things you don't know. The pasuk in Mishlei says, Emar l'chachma chaysi at, say to wisdom, you are my sister. That means you should only say things if you know clearly what halacha is, just like you know that your sister is forbidden to you. So you shouldn't be saying things that you don't know. Obviously, that implies that all these things had halachic implications and weren't stam questions. So they said to him, so then what is the real reason? So he answered them one by one. He said, why are the birds in Eretz Yisrael skinnier than the birds in Bavel? The reason is because they were exiled from the land. The birds were all exiled, while the birds in Bavel were never exiled. Like it says, Sha'anan Ma'iv min Ura v'sheket hu al shemarvu b'gadol halach. Says b'gadol halach. You see that the ones in Bavel didn't go into exile, but how do you know the ones in Eretz Yisrael did go into exile? So you can see it in the Brisa. Brisa's Rav Yehuda says, I'm going to show you that the exile lasted for 52 years. Not a single person entered all of the area of Yehuda, like it says in the pasuk. Al Harim, Esa, Bechi, Unihiv, Al Nois Min Barkina, Kinesis Mikli, Eish, Ever, Velesham, Kol Mikna, Me Aifa Shemayim, Ve'ad, Behema, Nadadu Halachu. This is Yirmiyahu crying over the Chorban, and he's saying that there was no sound of animals or birds or people walking there, or animals moving for the entire time. Now, Rabbi Yehuda was bringing this to prove that it was 52 years long. He says there's an extra word, behema, here. You already said there's no sound of animals. You don't have to say that animals didn't walk there, so the word behema is gematria 52. That's why that's there. But what we see from this is that it says that the birds didn't fly there. So obviously the birds in Eretz Yisrael did go into exile, the birds in Bavel did not, and that's why they are more cheerful than the birds in Eretz Yisrael are, and they're fatter. Okay. Now, on the subject of Yaakov, says the name of Yochanan, all the animals that left Eretz Yisrael came concise except for one, and that is the concise ispanin, our very own Spanish sardine. And the Gemara says the reason is because the rivers in Bavel do connect Eretz Yisrael, so most fish could swim back. They flow down the slopes into Nahar Paras. Nahar Paras connects underground to a spring which comes out in Ein Etam, which is near the base of Mikdash, and that's what actually fed the mikvah that the Kohen Gadol used to use. But you have to swim upstream to get through that long trip, and the Kulais Ispanin couldn't swim upstream. Its spine is too weak, and so it didn't return to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, next question that was asked, and Reichan is answering, is why are the holidays in Bavel happier? And he says because they're not involved in a curse. There was a curse in the holidays in Eretz Yisrael, which is Vishpati Kol Mesoisa. I will dampen all its joy. All of these things, its holidays, its Shabbos, and all these things will be not as joyful as they were before. And it says, I hated your months, your Rosh Chodesh, I hated your Yom Tov. It was a pain in the neck for me. What does it mean that it was a pain? Rabbi Elazar says, not only do you do Averis, but you make me start figuring out what punishment you deserve. That was often related to Yom Tovim. Like Rav Yitzchak says, there was no Yom Tov that didn't have something terrible happen a troop came to start up with the inhabitants of Tzipori, or Rav Chanina says it was no Yontif where in Tver you didn't have the political leaders of Rome coming and causing problems. Okay, next question was, why did Talmidei Chachamim in Bavel wear nice clothing? And he said that the Rav Yechanan said the answer is because it's not their place. Like people say, if I'm in my own town, I get honor just for my name, but if I'm going somewhere else, I have to wear nice clothing so people know who I am. Okay, on that there is a pasuk Habayim Asher Yaakov Yatzu Seferach Yisrael that the Talmidei Chachamim wear nice clothing. Okay, Rav Yosef says that refers to Talmidei Chachamim that are in Bavel, that they wear tzitzinu prachim l'Torah, they make tassels and flowers for the Torah's honor by wearing nice clothing. Next question was, why do Oivdei Avodah Zarah have contamination? The Gemara says because they didn't stand at Har Sinai. Because when the Nachash, the snake in Gan Eden, started up with Chava, he put a contamination into her, and when the Klal Yisrael stood at Har Sinai, it was removed, but the Goyim, the Ovdei Kechavim, didn't stand there, and therefore it was never removed, and it remains within them. The Gemara continues on this subject in the next.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.